A father returns from a trip earlier than expected, eager to surprise his twin daughters. But upon arriving home, he is met with a heavy silence and a paralyzing emptiness. Following a muffled sound, he discovers his daughters locked inside the sauna by their stepmother. Robert Miller adjusted the Rolex on his wrist as the plane began its descent toward JFK Airport. New York City stretched out infinitely below him, a sea of twinkling lights in the pre-dawn darkness. He was 3 days earlier than planned, but the longing for his daughters had become unbearable. Throughout the entire business conference in Miami, all he could think about were the giggles of his twins, Isabella and Sophia, running through their mansion, their high-pitched voices calling Daddy when he got home from work. At 45, Robert had built a business empire that started with a small construction company inherited from his father and had grown into one of New York's largest real estate development firms. But at that moment, looking at the lights of the city that had made him rich, all he wanted was to hug his 4-year-old girls and smell the baby shampoo in their curly hair. The meetings had wrapped up sooner than expected, and Robert didn't hesitate to rebook his flight. He wanted to surprise the girls, maybe take them for frozen yogurt or to play in Central Park, which they adored. Melissa would be surprised too. His second wife always complained that he traveled too much, that he was missing important moments of their daughter's childhood. At 38, she was 15 years his junior, a former model he had met at a gala 2 years after being widowed. The cab sped through the quiet streets of New York in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Robert watched the illuminated skyscrapers of Park Avenue from the window, thinking about how he would hug the twins in the morning, how euphoric they would be to see him in the kitchen having coffee. Their little hearts always fluttered with happiness when he showed up unexpectedly, running into his arms in their flannel pajamas. It was 2:30 in the morning when the key turned in the lock of their Greenwich, Connecticut mansion. Robert entered silently, breathing in the familiar scent of fabric softener and flowers that Melissa always kept around the house. He was only carrying a small carry-on, the rest could wait. The house was plunged into darkness, as was natural at that hour. He climbed the marble staircase toward the bedroom he shared with Melissa, expecting to find her fast asleep. But something was wrong. The silence wasn't the usual silence of a sleeping house. It was heavy, strange, charged with an invisible tension that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Robert stopped in the middle of the hallway, straining his ears. Where was Melissa's soft snoring that always calmed him after stressful trips? Where was the occasional sound of the twins stirring in their beds in the next room, whispering to each other as they often did? He walked to his daughter's room and pushed the door open carefully. His heart pounded. The beds were empty. The pink unicorn print sheets were perfectly stretched, showing no signs of having been slept. In the stuffed animals the girls never let go of, Isabella's brown bear and Sophia's white rabbit, were arranged on the pillows as if for decoration. Robert felt the first wave of panic. It was the middle of the night. The girls should have been asleep for hours. Where could they be? He rushed downstairs, checking every room in the mansion, the living room with its Italian leather sofas, the gourmet kitchen where they made pancakes on Sundays, the office filled with business awards. Nothing. The house felt abandoned, but Melissa's white BMW was in the garage. Robert started calling out in a low voice, trying not to wake the neighbors. Melissa, Isabella, Sophia. The echo of his voice returned, empty, from the marble walls. That's when he heard it. A muffled, almost imperceptible sound coming from the pool area out back. Robert walked toward the sound, his paternal instincts setting off alarms in his mind. It was like a distant whisper, a murmur that shouldn't exist at this hour. The sound was coming from inside the sauna he had built the previous year, a $50,000 investment Melissa had insisted on for her relaxation sessions. Robert approached the light wood sauna door and noticed it was latched from the outside, a simple but definitive latch. The sound became clearer. They were whispers, children's whispers, his daughter's whispers. Isabella, Sophia, he called, pressing his ear against the warm door. Daddy? Isabella's voice was weak, frightened, filled with a hope that broke Robert's heart. Is it really you, Daddy? Whispered Sophia. Robert felt the world spin. His daughters were locked inside the sauna. his babies. With trembling fingers, he unlatched the lock and opened the door. The heat that escaped was suffocating, oppressive, even with the heater off. The air was heavy, thick. On the sauna floor, hugging each other like two scared puppies, were his two little girls. Isabella and Sophia looked up at him, but they didn't run into his arms as they always did when he came home from a trip. They remained motionless, huddled together, as if waiting for permission to move. Their faces, normally rosy and full of life, were pale, their lips dry and cracked, their eyes red and swollen from crying. They were wearing the same pajamas he had last seen them in, 2 days ago. "What are you doing in here, my loves?" Robert asked, kneeling and extending his arms, trying to keep his voice calm despite the tremor that racked his body. "Mommy Melissa said we have to stay here until we learn to be obedient girls," whispered Sophia, her voice hoarse as if she had been screaming. "We were bad girls, Daddy," Isabella added, looking down. "We spilled juice on the rug." Robert felt something cold and terrible crawl up his spine. He picked them both up, noticing how light they were, how their small bodies trembled despite the suffocating heat. He carried them to the kitchen and gave them water in small plastic cups, watching them drink desperately, spilling some in their haste as if they hadn't had water in a long time. "How long have you been in there?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he wet towels to cool their faces. "Since yesterday morning," Isabella answered, avoiding his gaze. "Mommy Melissa said you wouldn't be back for many days, that we had plenty of time to learn our lesson about not making a mess." Robert hugged his daughters tightly, feeling hot tears burn his eyes. As he rocked them, his mind raced furiously. Melissa had locked his 4-year-old daughters in a sauna for over 24 hours, as punishment for spilling juice, as if they were animals that needed to be tamed. And where was Melissa now? Robert carried the twins to the living room sofa, covered them with the wool blanket they loved, and whispered words of comfort, promising he would never leave them again. But as he watched them fall asleep in his arms, a terrible realization began to form in his mind. The way they had reacted to seeing him, the hesitation, the fear in their small eyes, the resigned way they had accepted their punishment. This hadn't been the first time. As the night wore on and Robert watched over his daughter's restless sleep, observing how they startled at every small noise, he wondered how many other times they had been locked in that sauna. How many other cruel punishments they had suffered while he was away, building fortunes and closing deals, naively believing his girls were safe and loved at home. The front door opened silently. Familiar footsteps echoed in the entryway. Melissa was back, and Robert realized his life was about to change forever. Melissa walked through the front door as if nothing had happened, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She was impeccable as always, wearing a navy blue silk dress and carrying a small designer handbag. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as if she had just stepped out for coffee with friends. Robert remained motionless on the sofa, his 2 daughters sleeping in his arms. He watched Melissa put her key in her purse, carefully take off her shoes, and check her reflection in the hall mirror. Every gesture was calculated, routine. She showed no hurry or concern. It was as if coming home at 3 in the morning was completely normal. "Robert," her voice was surprised but not startled, "you're back early." He didn't answer immediately. He wanted to observe every reaction, every micro-expression on his wife's face. Melissa approached the living room, and it was then that she saw the girls sleeping in her husband's arms. "The girls are in the living room. Why aren't they in bed?" She frowned, as if it were the strangest thing in the world. "Where were you, Melissa?" Robert's voice was low, controlled, but carried a coldness she hadn't yet noticed. "With Patricia and Lucy. We went to dinner at Daniel and then had some wine at the hotel bar. I lost track of time." She smiled, that enchanting smile that had once won him over. "You know how it is when we get together. We gossip and—" "The girls were locked in the sauna." Melissa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. But Robert saw it. "What do you mean locked in the sauna?" "They were asleep when I left." "Since yesterday morning, Melissa. They told me they've been in there since yesterday morning." Melissa laughed, a forced laugh that sounded strange in the pre-dawn silence. "Robert, honey, you just got off a long flight. You're tired. The girls sometimes make up stories. You know how imaginative kids can be." She moved closer, reaching out to touch his face. "Let me put them to bed. You need to rest." Robert pulled away from her touch. "They were dehydrated, Melissa. Hungry. Terrified. Impossible. I put them to bed myself last night. They must have woken up in the middle of the night and gone to play in the sauna. You know how curious they are." The explanation flowed so naturally from Melissa's lips that Robert almost doubted himself. Almost. But then Sophia stirred in his arms, whispering something in her sleep. "We don't want to be in the dark again, Mommy Melissa. Please." Robert felt anger rise like hot lava in his chest. Sophia was having nightmares. His daughters were having nightmares about being locked in the dark. Listen to that, Melissa. Listen to what your daughter is dreaming about. Melissa shrugged. Nightmares are normal for kids their age. Maybe she saw something on TV that scared her. Robert studied his wife's face. Melissa was a natural actress. She always had been. It was part of the charm that had drawn him to her when they met. She could convince anyone of anything with her beauty and smooth talk. But now, watching her deny something he had seen with his own eyes, Robert wondered how many other times she had lied to him. "I'm putting the girls to bed," he said, standing up carefully. "Let me help," Melissa offered, but Robert shook his head. "I can handle it." He carried the twins up the stairs, feeling the weight of every step. In the girls' room, he laid them gently in their beds, covering them with the soft blankets. Isabella opened her eyes briefly as he tucked her in. "Daddy, you're not going away again, are you?" "No, my love. Daddy's staying right here." "Promise?" "I promise." Robert kissed each of his daughters on the forehead and went downstairs to face Melissa. She was in the kitchen making tea as if it were a normal night, as if nothing had happened. "Melissa, we need to talk." "Of course, honey. How about some tea? It'll help you relax." She placed 2 cups on the granite countertop, moving around the kitchen with feline grace. She was beautiful, Robert had to admit. At 38, she still had the slender body of her modeling days, always impeccable, always perfect. But there was something predatory in her movements that morning. "Why were the girls afraid to see me?" Robert asked directly. "Afraid? I don't understand." "They didn't run to me like they always do. They stayed still, as if they were waiting for permission." Melissa sighed dramatically. "Robert, you've been traveling so much lately. Maybe they were just confused, still half asleep. You did wake them up in the middle of the night." "They weren't sleeping, Melissa. They were awake, alert, and terrified." "You're being paranoid." Robert watched his wife pour the tea, noticing how her hands remained steady. There was no tremor, no nervousness. Melissa was completely in control. It was as if discussing locking children in a sauna was a routine matter. "How was your day yesterday?" he asked, changing his strategy. "Normal. I took the girls to school, picked them up in the afternoon, we did their homework, had dinner, and I watched Netflix after they went to sleep." "And were they well behaved?" An almost imperceptible pause. "As always." Robert knew she was lying. He could feel it. In the air, in the way she avoided his direct gaze, in the way her answers sounded rehearsed. "Melissa, if there are behavioral issues with the girls, we can talk about it. We can get professional help, set rules together." She laughed again, that artificial laugh. "Behavioral issues? Robert, your daughters are little angels. They never give me any trouble." The way she said, "your daughters," did not go unnoticed, as if they weren't her responsibility too, as if they were just a burden she had to bear. "Then why were they locked in the sauna?" "I already explained. They must have gone in there to play during the night. The door was latched from the outside, Melissa. Maybe the latch just fell into place. You know that lock can be sticky sometimes." Robert knew that lock. He had installed it himself. It didn't fall into place on its own. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight," he said finally. "As you wish, honey. You must be tired from your trip." Melissa finished her tea calmly, washed the cup, and put everything away. Then she went upstairs, her footsteps light on the marble. Robert remained in the kitchen watching her disappear down the upper hallway. Something was terribly wrong in his house. His daughters had been victims of something cruel, and his wife was blatantly lying about it. But Melissa was smart, calculating. If she was doing something to the girls, she would be careful not to leave any evidence. Robert walked silently to the twins' room. He pushed the door open gently and watched his daughters sleep. Even in their sleep, they seemed tense, as if ready to wake at the slightest noise. He sat down in the armchair in the room and decided he would spend the night on watch. He no longer trusted leaving the girls alone with Melissa, not after what he had discovered. As he watched his daughter's gentle breathing, Robert made a silent promise. No matter what he discovered in the coming hours or days, he would protect Isabella and Sophia, even if it meant destroying what was left of his marriage. At 5 in the morning, Melissa appeared at the door of the girls' room. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair loose over her shoulders. "Still here, Robert?" "Watching over my daughters." She watched him for a long moment, something dangerous flashing in her blue eyes. "They're my daughters too, Robert, don't you forget it." The threat in Melissa's words was subtle, but real. Robert realized he was entering a war he didn't even know existed, a war for the souls of his daughters, and Melissa had no intention of losing. Robert woke up in the armchair in the girls' room with a stiff neck and a racing heart. He had only slept for 2 hours, but a noise had startled him awake. It was the sound of Melissa moving through the house, her deliberate footsteps echoing down the hall. He checked his watch. 7 in the morning. The twins were still asleep, but Robert noticed something that made his blood run cold. Isabella had red marks on her right wrist, marks that hadn't been there the night before. He carefully approached the bed and examined his daughter's small arms. They were pressure marks, as if something had been tied there. "Isabella, sweetheart," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. She woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear before she recognized him. "Daddy? You stayed here all night?" "Yes, my princess. Tell me something. How did you hurt your wrist?" Isabella looked at the red marks and quickly hid her arm under the blanket. "I didn't hurt it. Isabella, you can tell me the truth. Daddy won't be mad." The little girl glanced nervously at the bedroom door. "Mommy Melissa said that if I tell you secrets, she'll take me to a place far away and you'll never find me again." Robert felt the blood freeze in his veins. Melissa was threatening his daughters to keep them silent. "Sweetheart, Mommy Melissa can't take you anywhere. Daddy will never let that happen." Sophia woke up at the same moment, as if by a conditioned reflex. The two always woke up together, Robert noticed, as if they were afraid of being alone. "Daddy, may I go potty?" Sophia asked with an excessive politeness for a 4-year-old. "Of course, my love. You don't have to ask for permission to go potty. Mommy Melissa says polite girls always ask for permission." Robert walked the girls to the bathroom and observed something that deeply disturbed him. They used the toilet quickly, almost in a rush, as if they were afraid of taking too long. They washed their hands meticulously, checked that the faucet was turned off tightly, that there were no drips in the sink. "Why do you do that so fast?" he asked. "Mommy Melissa doesn't like it when we take too long in the bathroom," Isabella explained. "She says girls who take too long are lazy." They went down to the kitchen where Melissa was already making breakfast. She was impeccable again, made up, hair-styled, wearing a light-colored dress that made her look like the perfect mother. "Good morning, my princesses," she said in a melodious voice. "Mommy made special pancakes for you." The girls sat at the table, but Robert noticed they ate strangely. They chewed quickly, swallowing large bites as if they were afraid the food would be taken from them. "Slow down, girls," Robert said. "There's no rush." Melissa laughed. "They've always been enthusiastic eaters. I love seeing them with such an appetite." But Robert observed that Melissa controlled their every move with her eyes. When Sophia spilled a little syrup on the table, the girl immediately looked at Melissa with terror in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mommy Melissa, it was an accident." "It's okay, my love," Melissa replied sweetly, but Robert saw the tension in her jaw. After breakfast, Melissa announced she was taking the girls to school. "Actually, I'll take them," Robert said. "No need, honey. You just got back from your trip. You should rest." "I want to take my daughters to school." There was a moment of silent tension. Melissa smiled, but her eyes didn't. As you wish. In the car, Robert watched his daughters in the rearview mirror. They were unusually quiet, staring out the window with expressions far too serious for 4-year-olds. Girls, do you like school? Yes, Daddy, they answered in unison. And your teacher? Miss Carla is nice, said Isabella. She never yells. The observation seemed innocent, but Robert caught the subtext. If Isabella thought it was important to mention that the teacher didn't yell, it was because someone at home did. At the school, Robert decided to speak with the teacher, Miss Carla, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and decades of experience with children. Mr. Miller, what a surprise to see you dropping off the girls. How was your trip? Good, thank you. Could I speak with you for a minute? Miss Carla sensed the seriousness in his voice. Of course, girls, you can go play. On the playground. When they were alone, Robert chose his words carefully. Carla, have you noticed any change in the twins' behavior? The teacher hesitated. Well, for the past few weeks they've been more reserved, less spontaneous. They've always been cheerful kids, but lately they seem more cautious. Cautious how? They ask permission for everything. If they can get a toy, if they can go to the bathroom, if they can speak. It's as if they're afraid of doing something wrong. Robert felt his stomach tighten. Anything else? Yesterday, Sophia drew a picture of her family. It was disturbing. She drew you, herself and Isabella, but the figure of Mrs. Miller was separate from the rest, very dark, almost haunted. Do you still have that drawing? I do. And there's something else, Mr. Miller. Last Thursday, Isabella came to school with a mark on her arm. When I asked what happened, she said she fell off her bike, but the mark looked like what? It looked like a small burn, like from a cigarette. Robert felt the world spin around him. Melissa smoked socially at parties but always denied it. Could she be using cigarettes to hurt the girls? Did you report this to anyone? I thought about calling you, but Mrs. Miller picked the girls up that day and explained that Isabella had hurt herself at home. She said they were going to the doctor. Robert knew Melissa had never taken Isabella to any doctor. Another lie. Back at home, Robert decided to act. He called for Carmen, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week and had been with them for 2 years. She was an observant woman and was fond of the girls. Carmen, I need to ask you something in confidence. Have you noticed anything strange at home when I'm not here? Carmen, a 60-year-old woman who had raised 5 children, looked around nervously. Mr. Miller, I don't want any trouble. You won't get into trouble. I just need to know if my daughters are okay. Carmen took a deep breath. The girls have changed a lot in the last few months. They used to run around the house, laugh, make a normal kid mess. Now they walk on tiptoes, whisper, and always stick together. And Mrs. Miller? She's different when you're not here. Very strict with the girls. She yells about everything. One day I saw her put Sophia in timeout in the dark closet for 2 hours because the girl got her clothes wet playing with water. Robert felt the anger swell again. Why didn't you ever tell me? Mrs. Miller told me that if I was a gossip, I'd lose my job, and I need the work, Mr. Miller. Is there anything else I need to know? Carmen hesitated for a long time. Last week when I came to clean, I heard the girls crying in the sauna. I asked Mrs. Miller about it, and she said they were playing hide and seek. But the crying didn't sound like they were playing. Robert hugged Carmen. Thank you for telling me, and don't worry about your job. That afternoon, when Melissa left for her social activities, Robert decided to investigate further. He searched the entire house looking for evidence. In the girls' bedroom closet, he found a small, soiled blanket hidden behind the clothes. It smelled of urine and fear. In Melissa's office, he found something even more disturbing. A planner where she noted the girls' infractions and the punishments applied. The notes were meticulous, organized, as if it were a system. Isabella. Spilled juice on Monday. Punishment, 2 hours in the sauna. Sophia laughed too loud during a cartoon. Punishment, 1 hour in the dark closet. Both ran through the house. Punishment, slept on the bathroom floor. Page after page of systematic cruelty, documented with scientific coldness. Robert photographed everything with his phone, his hands shaking with rage and horror. When Melissa returned home late that afternoon, she found Robert waiting in the living room, with the girls playing in the garden visible through the window. "How was your day, honey?" he asked in a controlled voice. "Wonderful. I went to the spa, then had lunch with Patricia." "Funny. I spent the day discovering some interesting things about how you take care of our daughters." Melissa froze, her mask of perfection faltering for an instant. "What are you talking about?" Robert placed the planner on the coffee table. "Recognize this?" Melissa's face paled, but she quickly composed herself. "That planner is private. You had no right to go through my things." "So, you admit it's yours? That you've been documenting every torture you've inflicted on my daughters?" "Torture?" Melissa laughed, but it sounded forced. "Robert, you're being dramatic. Those are just disciplinary records. Every good mother keeps track of her children's behavior. Locking 4-year-old children in saunas and closets isn't discipline, Melissa. It's torture." Melissa moved closer to him, her blue eyes shining with a coldness Robert had never seen before. "You've always been absent, Robert. Always traveling, always working. Someone had to raise your daughters properly, and I've done an excellent job. They are obedient, polite, well-behaved." "They're traumatized. They're afraid of everything." "They're disciplined. There's a difference." Robert realized he was looking at a person he didn't know. The woman he had married 2 years ago was a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had been systematically torturing his daughters. "This ends now, Melissa. You will not touch my daughters again." Melissa smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Your daughters?" "Robert, honey, legally they're my daughters too. And if you try to take them from me, I will prove that you are an absent and negligent father. Who do you think the courts will believe? A workaholic businessman who travels half the month, or a devoted mother who gave up her career to care for 2 little girls?" The threat hung in the air like poison. Robert realized Melissa had planned this all carefully. Every move, every torture, every lie was part of a larger plan, and now she was prepared to use the system against him. But Robert had a few cards up his sleeve too, and the war for his daughters' souls was just beginning. Robert spent a sleepless night planning his next move. Melissa was right about one thing. Legally, she had rights to the girls. But Robert had something she didn't expect, an absolute determination to protect his daughters and the financial resources for a prolonged legal battle. The next morning, while Melissa slept, Robert called Henry Davis, his personal attorney and longtime friend. "Henry, I need your help urgently. It's about my daughters." "Robert, what time is it? It's not even 6 in the morning." "Sorry to wake you, but this is an emergency. I've discovered that Melissa is abusing the girls." Henry's tone changed immediately. "What kind of abuse?" Robert explained everything. The sauna incident, the planner with its record of punishments, the marks on Isabella's wrist, the reports from the teacher and the housekeeper. Henry listened in silence. "Robert, this is extremely serious. I need you to document everything. Photograph the marks on the children, secure the planner, record conversations if you can. But be careful not to break any privacy laws." "What about custody? Melissa threatened to use my absence against me." "Unfortunately, she has a point. Courts often favor the maternal figure, especially when the father travels a lot. But child abuse changes everything. If we can prove..." Henry, I saw it with my own eyes." "I believe you, Robert, but courts require solid evidence. Melissa could claim the marks were accidents, that the planner is about normal discipline. We need something irrefutable." After hanging up, Robert discreetly installed security. Cameras in strategic points around the house. It was a violation of Melissa's privacy, but his daughter's safety came first. At 8 in the morning, Melissa came down for breakfast, impeccable as always. She watched Robert with a cold smile. "Didn't sleep well, honey? You look exhausted." "I'm fine." The girls came down soon after, and Robert noticed something that alarmed him. They always walked together, never separating for even a moment. It was as if they were afraid to be alone. "Daddy's going to take you to school again today," Melissa said, but there was a note of challenge in her voice. During breakfast, Robert watched every interaction. Melissa was subtle, but she controlled everything. When the girls could drink water, how much they could eat, even how they should chew. And she did it with smiles and sweet words that hid threats. "Sophia, honey, you're spilling sugar on the table. Remember that careful girls don't make messes." Sophia immediately stopped playing with the sugar, her little hands trembling. In the car on the way to school, Robert decided to try a different approach with his daughters. "Girls, if anyone ever hurts you or makes you feel scared, you can tell Daddy." Isabella and Sophia exchanged glances in the rearview mirror. "But what if the person who hurts us says they'll do something worse if we tell?" Isabella asked in a small voice. Robert felt his heart break. His daughters were being silenced by fear. "No one is going to do anything worse to you. Daddy promises." "You really promise?" asked Sophia. "Cross my heart." At school, Robert spoke with Ms. Carla again, who was even more concerned this time. "Mr. Miller, yesterday Isabella wet her pants during class. When I asked why she hadn't asked to go to the bathroom, she said she had forgotten to ask for permission at home and was punished. Now she's afraid to ask for anything." "Punished how?" "She wouldn't say. But Mr. Miller, a 4-year-old, shouldn't have that kind of fear. This isn't normal." Robert asked to see more of the girl's drawings. What he saw made him shudder. The recent drawings were dark, full of haunted figures and crying children. In one of Sophia's drawings, there were 2 little girls in a black box, with a large, menacing figure outside. "When did she draw this?" "Last week I asked what the black box was, and she said it was the place where bad girls go when they make Daddy angry." Robert photographed all the drawings with the teacher's permission. They were visual evidence of the psychological trauma his daughters were suffering. When he returned home, Robert found Melissa on the phone in the living room. She didn't see him arrive. "No, Patricia. He doesn't suspect anything serious yet. He thinks it's just childish tantrums. Yes, I have everything under control. The girls know they'll go through much worse if they open their mouths." Robert recorded the conversation on his phone, his blood boiling as he heard Melissa talk about his daughters as if they were objects of manipulation. "Robert is so naive. He believes I'm the perfect mother. Of course I document everything. If there's trouble, I have proof that he was absent, and I did everything myself." Melissa hung up and turned, coming face to face with Robert. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." She smiled, but there was something dangerous in her eyes. "Eavesdropping on private conversations, Robert. That's not very gentlemanly. Neither is torturing children very motherly." Melissa's mask finally dropped. Her face contorted into an expression of pure rage. "You don't understand anything. Those girls were wild when I got here. They cried, they screamed, they threw tantrums over everything. Someone had to civilize them." "They were 3 years old, Melissa. That's normal toddler behavior." "Normal?" Melissa scoffed. "Robert, you know nothing about raising children. You've spent your whole life working, letting others take care of them. I was the one who had to deal with the screaming, the whining, the constant demands for attention. So you traumatized them? I educated them. Now they are obedient, well-behaved girls. Anyone who sees them comments on how polite and calm they are." Robert realized that Melissa truly believed she was right. In her twisted mind, terrorizing children was a valid educational method. "It's over, Melissa. I'm filing for divorce and for full custody of the girls." Melissa approached him, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Good luck proving anything, Robert. You know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell everyone that you're an absent father who travels more than 15 days a month. I'm going to say you came home from a trip paranoid, accusing me of absurd things. I'm going to get a restraining order against you for defamation and threats. No judge will—" "Oh yes, they will. Especially when they find out you invaded my privacy, installed cameras in our home without my knowledge, and recorded my private conversations." Robert froze. Melissa had noticed the cameras. "That's right, honey, I noticed the cameras last night. You know where they are now? In the trash. And you know what else? I called my lawyer this morning. I'm already preparing a strategy to paint you as a controlling, paranoid husband." Robert realized he had underestimated Melissa. She wasn't just cruel, she was strategically brilliant. "And there's one more thing you don't know," Melissa continued, her smile widening. "Yesterday, after our little chat, I called Child Protective Services. I reported that you came home from your trip acting strangely with the children, asking invasive questions, scaring them with your paranoia about supposed mistreatment. Robert's world crumbled. Melissa had anticipated his every move. They're sending a social worker here tomorrow to evaluate the family situation. And you know what she'll find? An absent father who travels constantly and a devoted mother who lovingly cares for two perfectly behaved and happy little girls. The girls won't lie for you. They won't have to lie. They'll simply answer the questions. And when they're asked if they're happy, they'll say yes, because they know what happens if they say no. Robert felt a wave of despair. Melissa had built a perfect trap. His daughters were so traumatized they would lie to protect themselves, and that would be used against him. "You're a monster," he whispered. "I'm a survivor, Robert, and I've always been better at planning ahead than you." Melissa went upstairs, leaving Robert alone in the living room, realizing he had lost the first battle of a war he didn't even know he was fighting. But when he looked out the window and saw his daughters playing in the garden, still together as always, still as alert as frightened little animals, Robert made a promise. No matter how smart Melissa was, no matter how well she had planned her defense, he would find a way to save his daughters, even if it cost him everything he had. The phone rang. It was Child Protective Services, confirming the visit for the next day. The war was officially declared. The social worker arrived promptly at 10 in the morning. Dr. Sandra Mendez was a woman in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to observe every detail. Robert greeted her at the door, trying to hide his nervousness. "Mr. Miller, I'm Dr. Mendez from CPS. We received a report concerning the well-being of the children in this residence." Melissa appeared as if from nowhere, wearing a delicate floral dress, her hair down and her makeup soft, making her look like a devoted mother straight out of a magazine. "Dr. Mendez, I'm so glad you've come. I'm very worried about my husband. He came back from his trip yesterday exhibiting very strange behavior." The way Melissa presented herself as the victim was masterful. Her eyes filled with controlled tears. Her voice trembled just enough. "Can you tell me what's been happening?" Dr. Mendez asked, taking out a tablet to make notes. "My husband arrived from a business trip and started making these absurd accusations," Melissa said, dabbing at a non-existent tear. "He was very stressed, paranoid. He accused me of mistreating the girls when all I do is care for them with love." Robert felt the trap closing in around him. "Doctor, I wasn't paranoid. I found my daughters locked in the house's sauna. They were scared, dehydrated." "Robert, honey," Melissa interrupted gently, "you know they went in there to play during the night. We've already talked about this." Dr. Mendez made notes, her neutral expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "May I speak with the children?" "Of course," Melissa said immediately. "They're in their room playing. They're angels, Doctor. Very well-behaved girls." They went up the stairs to the twins' room. Robert noticed how Melissa walked slightly ahead, always controlling the situation. In the room, Isabella and Sophia were sitting on the bed, quietly playing with dolls. When they saw the adults, they immediately stood up like little soldiers at attention. "Hi, girls," Dr. Mendez said in a gentle voice. "Can you tell me what it's like to live here?" The twins glanced quickly at Melissa before answering. "It's good," Isabella said in a low voice. "Mommy Melissa takes good care of us," Sophia added. Robert watched the interaction with a broken heart. His daughters were so conditioned by fear that they couldn't speak the truth even when they had the chance. "Do you play a lot?" the social worker continued. "Yes," they answered in unison. But Robert noticed how their little eyes darted nervously toward Melissa. "And are you happy here?" There was an almost imperceptible pause. Robert saw Isabella swallow hard before answering. "Yes, we are." Dr. Mendez spoke with the girls for a few more minutes, asking questions about their routine school and playtime. The twins answered everything perfectly, as if they had memorized the answers. And they probably had, Robert realized. Melissa had prepared them for everything. After examining the children's room, the social worker asked to see the rest of the house. Melissa proudly gave the tour, showing off the immaculate rooms, the organized kitchen, the well-kept garden. When they reached the pool area, Robert pointed to the sauna. "That's where I found the girls locked up." Dr. Mendez examined the sauna carefully. It was clean, with no signs that children had been confined there. "I see it has a latch," she observed. "For safety," Melissa explained promptly. "We don't want the children going in by themselves and getting hurt by the heat." It was a reasonable explanation. Robert realized Melissa had an answer for everything. Back in the living room, Dr. Mendez sat down to make her final notes. "Mrs. Miller, you reported concerns about your husband's behavior. Can you elaborate?" Melissa sighed dramatically. "Robert travels a lot for work. He's gone 15, 20 days a month. When he comes back, he gets paranoid, as if he doesn't trust me to take care of the girls. This time was worse. He accused me of terrible things." "And what is your version of events, Mr. Miller?" Robert tried to explain everything: the marks on the children, their fearful behavior, the teacher's reports. But without physical evidence, his words sounded like the paranoia of a father guilty for being absent. "Doctor," Melissa said in a trembling voice, "I'm worried that the stress from his job is affecting Robert's judgment. He's been very aggressive with me in front of the girls. I'm afraid it could escalate into something worse." Robert felt the floor give way beneath him. Melissa was completely flipping the narrative, painting him as the aggressor. "That's not true," he protested, but his voice sounded desperate. Dr. Mendez made more notes, then closed her tablet. "I will prepare a report based on today's visit. For now, I see no immediate signs of child abuse. The children appear well cared for, well fed and polite. However, I will recommend family therapy sessions to help the family resolve these communication issues." Robert knew he had lost. Melissa had orchestrated everything perfectly. After the social worker left, Melissa turned to Robert with a triumphant smile. "See how easy that was? Now there's an official report documenting your baseless accusations and your unstable behavior. You set this all up?" "Of course I did." "Did you think I was an amateur?" Robert went up to the girls' room. He found them still sitting on the bed, as motionless as statues. "Daddy, did we do good?" Isabella asked in a small voice. "Mommy Melissa said if we told secrets, very bad things would happen," whispered Sophia. Robert knelt in front of his daughters, his heart breaking. "You didn't do anything wrong, my princesses. Daddy understands." But inside, Robert felt defeated. How could he protect his daughters if they themselves were too terrified to ask for help? That afternoon, while Melissa was out for social engagements, Robert tried a new strategy. He called Dr. Charles Mendoza, a renowned child psychologist. "Doctor, I need an urgent psychological evaluation for my daughters. I suspect they are suffering from trauma." "Mr. Miller, I can schedule you for next week, but I must inform you that if there are signs of abuse, I am legally obligated to report it to the authorities." "That's exactly what I need." Robert scheduled the appointment for the twins without telling Melissa. It was a risk, but it was his only hope of getting professional evidence of the girls' trauma. When Melissa returned that evening, Robert confronted her again. "This isn't over, Melissa. I'm going to keep fighting for my daughters." "Good luck," she laughed. "You know what else I did today? I spoke with 5 of our neighbors. I told them you came home from your trip very stressed, making strange accusations against me. Now they're all concerned about your mental state." Robert realized that Melissa was systematically destroying his credibility on all fronts. "Oh, and there's one more surprise," Melissa continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "My lawyer has already prepared a petition for a restraining order. If you continue to threaten me or make baseless accusations, you'll be forced to leave the house." Robert opened the envelope. The document was real, detailed, painting him as an abusive and unstable husband. "You really thought of everything," he said, amazed at Melissa's calculated cruelty. "Robert, honey, you underestimate me. You always have. You think because you have money you can control everything. I control the things that matter, the children, the narrative, public opinion." That night, Robert lay awake, planning his next move. Melissa was smart, but Robert had built a business empire by being smarter than his competitors. He would find a way to beat her. The next morning, Robert discovered that Melissa had left early with the girls. She had only left a note. Took the girls to spend the day. And my sisters, you need time to reflect on your behavior. Robert called Melissa's cell, but it went to voicemail. He tried calling the girls' school and found out that Melissa had called to report that the children would be absent for family reasons. A wave of panic washed over Robert. Melissa had taken his daughters and he had no idea where to find them. The phone rang. It was Henry, his lawyer. "Robert, we have a problem. Melissa's lawyer has filed an emergency petition with the court. She's claiming you physically threatened her and that the children are at risk in your presence." "That's a lie." "I know, but there's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. And Robert, she has witnesses, neighbors who will confirm that you've been unstable since you got back from your trip." Robert hung up the phone and sank onto the sofa. Melissa had played her checkmate. She had the children, she had witnesses, she had the system's sympathy. And Robert was alone in an empty house, realizing he had lost everything he loved to a woman he didn't even truly know. The sound of the front door echoed through the house. Melissa was back, but she was alone. "Where are my daughters?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse with despair. Melissa smiled, that cold smile he now knew so well. "Safe, away from you. And if you want to see them again, you'll accept my terms." Robert stared at Melissa, trying to fathom the extent of her cruelty. She was serene, calculating, as if controlling the lives of 3 people was just another game she had perfectly mastered. "What are your terms?" he asked, his voice thick with barely contained despair. Melissa sat elegantly on the sofa, crossing her legs as if in a business meeting. "Simple. You stop these ridiculous accusations, you publicly admit you had a breakdown due to work-related stress, and you agree to psychological therapy. In return, the girls come home tonight. And after that? After that, you go back to traveling like you always have. I continue to raise the girls my way, and we all live in harmony." Robert felt the trap snap shut completely. "You want me to accept you continuing to torture my daughters?" "I educate your daughters, Robert, and they have become exemplary girls under my care. Anyone who sees them comments on how obedient and well-behaved they are." "They're obedient because they're terrified," Melissa sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. "Robert, you have until tomorrow morning to decide. The hearing is at 9. You can show up and accept my terms, or you can show up as an unstable father who loses custody of his daughters." Melissa's phone rang. She answered with a smile. "Hi, honey. Yes, they're fine." "No, he's still resisting, but he'll give in." "Of course, keep them there until I confirm." Robert realized there were other people involved in Melissa's plan. She wasn't acting alone. "Who were you talking to?" "Someone who understands the importance of keeping children disciplined." That night Robert couldn't sleep. Every minute that passed was a minute his daughters were away from him, possibly suffering even more punishments. At 3 in the morning, he decided to act. He called Henry. "Henry, I need you to do something urgently. Hire a private investigator. I want to know everything about Melissa's past before she met me." "Robert, it's 3 in the morning." "I don't care what time it is. Melissa didn't just appear out of nowhere. She has a history and I need to find out what it is." "All right, I know a good one, but this will take time." "We don't have time. The hearing is tomorrow. This morning." Robert hung up and began pacing the empty house. In Melissa's office, he searched for any clue as to where she might have taken the girls. He found a phone book and started calling every number. The first call was to Patricia, Melissa's friend. "Hello? Who is this?" "Patricia, it's Robert, Melissa's husband. Do you know where she took my daughters?" "Robert? What time is it? I don't know what you're talking about." But Robert detected a hesitation in her voice. "Patricia, my 4-year-old daughters are missing. If you know anything—" "Look, Robert, I think you should talk to Melissa about this. I can't get involved." The line went dead. Robert kept calling other contacts, but they all gave evasive answers or denied any knowledge. At 5 in the morning, exhausted and desperate, Robert made a drastic decision. He broke into Melissa's personal computer, something he had never done in their 2 years of marriage. What he found left him in shock. Melissa maintained a secret blog on a website about strict child rearing. Under the pseudonym Perfect Mom, she documented methods of effective discipline for problematic children. The posts were detailed, cold, almost scientific. Day 15. Applied controlled confinement method on the twins after an episode of disobedience. Result: significant improvement in behavior over the following 48 hours. Day 23. Test of resistance to authority. Both children attempted to negotiate punishments. Applied progressive isolation technique until complete compliance was achieved. Day 30. Husband returns from trip tomorrow. Children prepared for demonstration of obedience. Success of conditioning program is evident. Robert read post after post, each more disturbing than the last. Melissa was systematically documenting the psychological breakdown of his daughters as if it were a scientific experiment. Even more shocking were the comments. Dozens of other educators praised Melissa's methods, shared their own techniques, and discussed ways to break childish stubbornness. Robert discovered that Melissa was a leader in this dark community. There were other parents following her advice, applying her techniques to their own children. At the end of the blog, Robert found something that made him stop breathing. Photos. Melissa had photographed the girls' training sessions. The images showed Isabella and Sophia in various situations, locked in the sauna, standing in a corner for hours, eating, off the floor like animals, sleeping on the cold bathroom floor. The photos were accompanied by clinical analyses of behavioral progress and resistance breaking. Robert printed everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, he had solid, irrefutable evidence. At 6 in the morning, he called Henry. "I found it. I have evidence that will destroy Melissa in court." He quickly explained about the blog and the photos. Henry was silent for a long moment. "Robert, this changes everything. But we need to proceed with caution. Melissa still has the girls, and if she realizes we've found this, she could hurt them even more." "Exactly. We'll present this at the hearing as surprise evidence. In the meantime, I'll request an emergency order to locate the children." At 7 in the morning, Melissa returned home. She was alone again, but seemed confident. "Have you decided to accept my terms, Robert?" "Where are my daughters?" "Safe. Awaiting your answer." Robert watched her carefully. Melissa showed not a shred of nervousness or guilt. It was as if she was completely unaware that she had done anything wrong. "Melissa, do you really believe your methods are normal?" "My methods are effective. Your daughters were uncontrollable when I came here. Now they are models of obedience." "They were normal 3-year-old children." "They were savages who needed to be civilized." Robert realized he was dealing with someone deeply disturbed. Melissa truly believed that torturing children was a valid educational method. "And if I accept your terms, how do I know you'll treat them better?" Melissa smiled. "I won't treat them better, Robert. I'll treat them exactly as I always have. The difference is that you will stop interfering." Melissa's brutal honesty was terrifying. She wasn't even trying to pretend she would change. At 8 in the morning, Robert and Henry headed to the courthouse. Robert carried a folder with all the evidence from Melissa's blog. At the courthouse entrance, Robert saw Melissa arriving with her lawyer, an elegant, middle-aged woman. Melissa was impeccable as always, wearing a light blue suit that made her look like a respectable mother. "Robert," she waved, as if it were a casual social encounter. "I hope you've made the right decision." In the courtroom, Robert felt small before the magnitude of what was at stake. A stranger, a judge, would decide his daughter's fate based on the evidence presented. Melissa's lawyer, Ms. Costa, began her presentation by painting Robert as an absent and unstable father. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted mother who gave up her career to lovingly care for 2 small children. Mr. Miller, on the other hand, spends more time away from home than present, and when he returns, he exhibits paranoid and aggressive behavior." She presented the social worker's report, the neighbors' statements, and even medical records showing Robert had sought psychological help in the past for work-related stress. When it was Henry's turn, he stood up with the folder of evidence. "Your Honor, I ask for permission to present evidence that reveals the true nature of the care Mrs. Miller provides to the children." Robert watched Melissa's face as Henry began to present the blog. For the first time, he saw something resembling fear in her eyes. The judge examined the evidence in silence. The detailed posts about psychological torture, the photos of the children being abused, the comments from an entire community dedicated to psychologically breaking young children. "Mrs. Miller," the judge finally said, "do you recognize this material as your own?" Melissa hesitated for the first time since Robert had known her. "Your Honor, that blog was... it was misinterpreted. They are recognized educational methods." "Educational methods that involve confining 4-year-old children in saunas?" Melissa's mask finally shattered completely. Her composure disintegrated in the face of the irrefutable evidence. "Where are the children, Mrs. Miller?" the judge asked sternly. Melissa looked desperately at her lawyer, who seemed equally shocked by the revelations. They are safe." "Where?" The silence stretched for long seconds. Robert could hear his own heart pounding. Then Melissa uttered the words that chilled Robert's blood. "They are being prepared for a new family, a family that understands the importance of proper discipline." The courtroom erupted into motion after Melissa's words. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order as Robert leaped from his chair, his despair turning to pure adrenaline. "Where are my daughters?" he yelled, lunging toward Melissa. "Where did you take them?" 2 bailiffs restrained him as the judge ordered absolute silence. "Mrs. Miller," the judge said in a glacial tone, "I will ask again. Where are the children, Isabella and Sophia Miller?" Melissa had completely lost her composure. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale, but her eyes still shone, with defiance. "They are with people who will raise them properly, people who understand that children need real discipline." Melissa's lawyer stood up, visibly desperate. "Your Honor, my client needs psychological assistance. She is clearly not in a state to—" "Your client has committed kidnapping," the judge interrupted, "and she is confessing to it in open court." Robert felt the world spin. His daughters weren't just hidden. They had been handed over to strangers. Strangers who, according to Melissa, shared her sadistic methods of education. The judge ordered Melissa's immediate arrest and activated the emergency protocol for locating missing children. In a matter of minutes, the courtroom had become an operations center. "Henry," Robert grabbed his lawyer's arm, "how long could they have been with these people?" "Stay calm, Robert. We're going to find them." But Robert knew that every passing hour was an hour of possible torture for Isabella and Sophia. If Melissa had found people who approved of her methods, his daughters were in mortal danger. The police station became a whirlwind of activity. Robert provided every piece of information he could gather: contacts from Melissa's phone, friends' addresses, any clue that might lead to the girls. It was then that Detective Sandra Olson, a specialist in crimes against children, made a shocking discovery. "Mr. Miller, we've analyzed your wife's blog and found a much larger network than we imagined. There are dozens of people involved in this extreme child discipline community, and some of them live right here in the New York area." She showed him a list of names and addresses she had compiled from the comments and connections on Melissa's blog. "We're going to conduct simultaneous raids on all these addresses," Olson continued. "Your daughters could be at any one of them." Robert insisted on accompanying. The raids, against everyone's advice. He couldn't stand by while his girls were being searched for. The first house was in Scarsdale. It was an imposing mansion, seemingly normal from the outside. The owner, Veronica Campbell, a woman in her 50s, greeted the police with feigned surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know any Melissa." But when the officers entered the house, they found disturbing evidence: rooms with locks on the outside, restraints disguised as children's furniture, surveillance cameras pointed at kids' beds. They didn't find Isabella and Sophia, but they found 2 other children aged 6 and 7, locked in a converted basement. The children were in a state of shock, barely able to speak. "Where are the twins?" Robert pleaded with Veronica, who was now in handcuffs. "I don't know what twins you're talking about," she answered coldly, but her eyes betrayed her. The second house was even more disturbing. Charles Mendez, 45, had turned his residence into a veritable training camp for child behavioral correction. There were timers on the walls, punishment charts, even a loudspeaker system to issue commands. Again, they didn't find the twins, but they rescued a 5-year-old girl who was being held in an isolation room, a windowless cubicle the size of a closet. Robert was growing desperate. Each house they visited revealed more horrors, but his daughters remained missing. It was at the third house that they got a real lead. Patricia Sanders, Melissa's friend, whom Robert had called in the middle of the night, was in a panic when the police arrived. "I didn't want to be involved in this," she screamed as she was arrested. "Melissa made me." In Patricia's living room, Robert saw something that made him freeze: Isabella's and Sophia's tiny shoes placed neatly against the wall. "They were here," Olsen said, examining the shoes. "And recently." Under pressure during questioning, Patricia finally confessed. "Melissa brought the girls over yesterday morning. She said it was temporary, that you were having family problems. But the girls were different, scared, silent, and they had marks on them." "Where are they now?" Robert clutched his daughter's shoes to his chest. "Melissa took them to the estate, the Fernandez family estate upstate. She said they would learn real discipline there." Robert knew the Fernandezes vaguely. They were known in New York's social circles, seemingly respectable people. The idea that they could be involved in this sadistic network was terrifying. The drive upstate felt like an eternity. Robert sat in the back of the police car, watching the landscape blur by as his mind conjured increasingly desperate scenarios of what his daughters might be enduring. The Fernandez estate was isolated, surrounded by dense woods. It was the perfect place to hide kidnapped children. When they arrived, they found the gates locked and initial resistance from the owners. Edward Fernandez, 60, and his wife Clara tried to deny any involvement. "We don't know what you're talking about. There are no children here." But the search warrant allowed the police to enter, and what they found chilled Robert to the bone. In an annex of the main house, there was a structure that looked like a prison-like boarding school. Small rooms with iron bunk beds, bathrooms with no privacy, a central hall with chairs arranged in rows like a military academy. And in one of the rooms, huddled on a bed, were Isabella and Sophia. Robert ran toward his daughters but stopped short when he saw them. The girls were dressed in identical grey uniforms like little prisoners. Their hair had been cut, short, almost shaved. They looked at him with empty eyes, without immediate recognition. "Isabella? Sophia? It's me, Daddy." The girls looked at each other as if asking for permission to react. "Daddy?" Isabella finally whispered, but her voice was different, quieter, more controlled. "We were bad girls, Daddy," Sophia said, the words sounding as if they had been repeated thousands of times. "Aunt Clara said we deserved to be punished." Robert hugged his daughters, feeling how thin they were, how they trembled. They no longer knew how to receive affection. They had been conditioned to expect punishment for any behavior. "You weren't bad girls," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You're perfect. Daddy came to get you." But when he tried to lead them out of the room, the girls resisted. "We can't leave," said Isabella. "We don't have permission." "Aunt Clara said if we leave without permission, we have to go in the black box," Sophia added. Robert looked around the room and saw in the corner a wooden structure that looked like an upright coffin. It was too small for an adult, but just the right size for a 4-year-old child. The black box was an instrument of torture designed specifically for small children. Robert turned to find Clara Fernandez being arrested. She wore the same cold expression Melissa always had. "You're making a mistake," she said calmly to the officers. "These children were being educated. In 2 weeks they would have been completely disciplined." "Disciplined for what?" Robert yelled. Clara smiled. "For adoption. There's a family in Europe that pays very well for properly trained children." Robert's world shattered again. This wasn't just about psychological torture. Melissa had sold his daughters. They were being prepared to be sold as domestic slaves to a foreign family. "Detective," Olsen approached Robert. "Mr. Miller, we found forged adoption papers. Your daughters were scheduled to be sent out of the country next week." Robert hugged his daughters tighter, realizing how close he had come to losing them forever. If he hadn't come back from his trip early, if he hadn't discovered Melissa's blog, Isabella and Sophia would have disappeared forever. But when he tried to take them home, he discovered that the psychological torture had been so intense that the girls could no longer function outside the system of control to which they had been subjected. They asked for permission to breathe, to blink, to exist. Robert realized that although he had found his daughters, the battle to reclaim their souls was just beginning. 6 months after the rescue, Robert watched his daughters playing in the garden of their new home. It was a scene he never thought he would see again. Isabella and Sophia laughing, running freely, simply being children. But the road to get there had been the hardest of his life. The first few days after the rescue were a nightmare. The twins came home like two broken dolls, unable to make any decision without express permission. They asked for permission to eat, to drink water, to go to the bathroom. They slept on the floor because they thought they didn't deserve beds. Robert had fired the entire staff of the Greenwich mansion and moved with the girls to a smaller, cozier house in a quiet neighborhood. He wanted them to feel safe, not impressed by a luxury they now associated with suffering. The child psychologist, Dr. Annabel Carter, had been clear from the start. "Mr. Miller, your daughters have suffered severe psychological abuse. They were systematically broken and reconditioned. Recovery will take years, not months." Robert had cancelled all his professional commitments. His company was left in the hands of his directors, while he dedicated himself entirely to his daughters. For the first time in decades, work took a back seat. The first therapy sessions were devastating. Robert watched through a one-way mirror as Dr. Carter tried to get the girls to play. They sat motionless, waiting for orders. When the psychologist offered them toys, they asked if they had permission to touch them. "May I have this doll?" Isabella would ask, her voice still robotic. "You can have any toy you want," Dr. Carter would reply, patiently. "But what if it's wrong? What if I break it?" "It's okay if it breaks. Toys are for playing." The concept that they could do something just for pleasure was completely alien to the twins. Meanwhile, Melissa's trial unfolded in court. The investigation uncovered an international child trafficking ring disguised as behavioral education. Dozens of children had been tortured and sold over the years. Melissa tried to plead insanity, but the evidence from the blog proved her actions were calculated and premeditated. During the trial, she showed zero remorse. "They don't understand," she said when questioned about her methods. "Modern children are wild. Someone has to civilize them." Robert attended every hearing, watching the woman he had married be revealed as a cold, calculating predator. He learned that Melissa had been abandoned by her parents at age 5 and raised in a rigid, abusive institution. Her childhood trauma had morphed into a compulsive need to control and break other children. It didn't justify what she had done, but it explained the origin of her monstrosity. The sentence was historic: 25 years in prison for kidnapping, child abuse, conspiracy, and human trafficking. 15 other members of the network were sentenced to terms ranging from 10 to 20 years. But the real battle was happening at home. Robert learned to be a father in a completely different way. He began to watch his daughters' every gesture, every micro-expression that indicated fear or anxiety. He changed his entire routine to be constantly present when they needed him. Carmen, the housekeeper who had witnessed Melissa's abuse, came back to work for the family. But now her role was much more that of a surrogate grandmother than an employee. She helped Robert reintroduce the girls to the concept of unconditional love. "Mr. Miller," she said one day, "the girls are starting to laugh when they think no one is looking." It was small but significant progress. The first major breakthrough happened 3 months after the rescue. Sophia was having a nightmare and woke up crying in the middle of the night. Typically, she would swallow her tears and force herself back to sleep. But that night, something changed. "Daddy," she called out softly. Robert rushed to the room and found his daughter with tears in her eyes. "I had a bad dream." "Do you want to tell Daddy about it?" "I dreamed that Mommy." Melissa came back and took us to the black box again. Robert hugged his daughter, feeling his own heart break. "Mommy, Melissa is never coming back, my love. She's in a place where she can't hurt anyone. Promise?" "I promise. And you know what else? If you have nightmares, you can always call for Daddy, no matter what time it is." It was the first time Sophia had asked for help on her own, in months. Isabella took longer to open up. She was the older twin by 2 minutes and had taken on the role of protecting her sister during the abuse. She carried a guilt that should never exist in a 4-year-old. During a therapy session, she finally exploded. "I let Mommy Melissa hurt Sophia. I'm a bad sister." Dr. Carter worked patiently to undo the cognitive distortion that Melissa had implanted in the girl's mind. "Isabella, you were a small child. It wasn't your responsibility to protect anyone. It was the adult's responsibility to protect you. But I could have screamed louder. I could have disobeyed more. And if you had done that, what would have happened? Mommy Melissa would have hurt us more. So you did exactly the right thing. You tried to keep you both safe in the only way you could." Gradually, Isabella began to understand that survival was not a betrayal. Robert also went to therapy. He carried an overwhelming guilt for not having seen the signs sooner, for trusting Melissa, for prioritizing work over his family. "Robert," said Dr. Marks, his therapist, "you couldn't have known. Melissa was an expert manipulator. She fooled social workers, neighbors, teachers. You were her victim as much as your daughters were. But I should have protected them. And that's exactly what you did. The moment you discovered the truth, you moved heaven and earth to save them. That's what a father does." The second major breakthrough came when the girls started throwing normal childhood tantrums. Robert was making dinner when he heard screaming from the living room. He ran to see what had happened and found Isabella and Sophia fighting over a toy. "It's mine," Isabella yelled, pulling on one side of the doll. "No, I had it first," Sophia retorted, pulling on the other. Robert stood there, watching the scene with tears in his eyes. His daughters were fighting. They were being normal, selfish, noisy children. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Girls," he said, trying to sound serious, "you're going to break the doll." "She won't share," Isabella accused. "She's the one who won't share," Sophia shot back. Robert resolved the fight with the Solomonic wisdom of setting a timer for each of them to play for 15 minutes. But inside, he was celebrating. His daughters finally felt safe enough to express anger, frustration, jealousy, all the emotions that Melissa had suppressed through terror. 6 months later, the changes were remarkable. The girls returned to school, but to a new one where no one knew their history. Robert had told the teachers about the trauma, but asked that they treat the twins like normal children. The new teacher, Ms. Lucy, reported impressive progress. At first, they were too quiet, too submissive. But now, Isabella has made friends with 3 other kids, and Sophia loves making a mess in the sandbox. Robert had learned to cherish every little bit of mischief, every silly act of disobedience, every typical childhood tantrum. They were signs that his daughters were reclaiming their stolen childhood. In family therapy, Dr. Carter observed the interaction between father and daughters with professional satisfaction. "Robert, you've all come an incredible way. The girls are no longer the broken children who arrived here. They are becoming who they were always meant to be." "I still have nightmares," Robert admitted. "I dream that Melissa comes back or that I find out more people were involved. That's natural. But look at your daughters now." Robert looked. Isabella was building a tower with blocks, while Sophia was trying to knock it down. They were both laughing loudly without a care in the world about making too much noise. "Are they healed?" he asked. "Complete healing from trauma of this magnitude is a complex concept," Dr. Carter replied. "But they have learned that the world can be safe, that adults can be trustworthy, that they deserve unconditional love. That's more than healing. It's rebuilding." Robert knelt between his daughters, who immediately threw themselves into his arms. "Daddy, look at my tower," Isabella said proudly. "I helped," Sophia added. "It's beautiful," Robert said, kissing them both. "You are the most talented builders in the world." The girls laughed and went back to playing. Robert watched them, realizing he had finally found the balance between protecting them and letting them be free. That night, after reading stories to the girls and watching them fall asleep in their own beds, wearing pajamas they had chosen themselves, Robert sat on the porch of their new house. Carmen brought him a coffee and sat beside him. "They're okay, Mr. Miller," she said softly. "They are," he agreed. They finally are. Robert looked up at the stars, thinking about how his life had completely changed in less than a year. He had lost a fortune in legal fees and set aside a multi-million-dollar company. But he had gained something infinitely more valuable, the chance to truly be a father to his daughters. In the girls' room, Isabella and Sophia slept, wrapped in each other's arms, peaceful smiles on their faces. There were no more constant nightmares, no more fear of waking up in captivity. Robert had learned that no professional success was worth being absent from his daughters' lives. No meeting was more important than their hugs. No contract was worth more than watching them grow up free and happy. The war was over, and finally everyone had won except for the monsters who were now rotting behind bars. Robert closed, his eyes listening to the soft sounds of the quiet night. For the first time in a year, he was able to sleep in complete peace. His daughters were safe, and he was there to make sure they stayed that way, forever.